Hello dear chess friends from International Chess School. In today's lecture we will watch a game played in September 2011 between the Grandmasters Romain Edouard from France, rated 2608, and former strong Grandmaster John van der Wiel from Netherlands. He was rated above 2600 also, but now his rating is around 2460. The point of this lecture is to show you how in the modern praxis an attack is built right from the opening, how the speed of the attack is increased by the player with the white pieces, and how white is using his superior theoretical knowledge in the opening. The game started with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. Now the game returned to the queen's gambit declined. Knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, and short castle. This is already a committal move, while white didn't push even e3. It is a certain commitment to go with the king already on the g file. As you know, some players warm up slower than the others, and in the modern chess, the player with superior theoretical knowledge try to use this in his favor and to put pressure already from the very beginning against the opponent in order to induce mistakes in the game. Since black already committed, white played a3, a useful waiting move which will help whites later to increase the speed of the attack, as after d takes c4, white will push e2, e4 in just one step, compared to e2, e3 and e3, e4, which requires two moves. Besides that, white forbids bishop b4 and shows his intentions to remain for a longer period of time with the king in the middle of the board. And the move a3, which takes b4 under control, is meant to help white activate his long-range acting pieces. The queen will go on c2, and the rook from a1 will be developed on d1, creating x-ray pressure along the d file. Black played b6. Since white didn't manifest his intentions to take on d5, the bishop from c8 has no future on c8 h3 diagonal. For this reason, the black side in Queen's Gambit declined often choose this way to develop the light squares bishops. But after Queen c2, which is in fact a novelty, white shows that he will focus on attacking the light squares around the black king. Why? Because the light squares bishop from c8 is unable to participate in defense. Now you can notice that knight b4 is not possible, and the queen has an excellent active position. Previously, in this position have been tried c takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, but this kind of knight's exchange may look interesting, because the defender knight from f6 will be missing, but white doesn't want to open the c8 h3 diagonal, and he must preserve the minor pieces on the board while he's intending an attack on the king side. e3, c5, bishop d3, c4. I'll show you this line only to see that nothing's new. White was inspired by this variation in choosing his to-do list for the presented game. Bishop c2, knight c6, h4, the same idea. White wants to install the knight on g5, and in conjunction with these active pieces tries to create an attack on light squares in the absence of knight f6. b5, black's counterplay on the queen side is in slow motion. Knight g5, h6, queen h5, and now queen e8, a very useful defensive move which threatens to move the f pawn, f7, f5 for example, closing the b1 h7 diagonal and offering the queen's exchange. I suppose that white was inspired by this line and tried to find an improvement, which he did with a great success. Queen c2. Of course, white will be happy to fight against the c4 pawn. After d takes e4, e4 will follow. Is a favorable case for white, since the d4 pawn is not attacked. Usually when black chooses to give up the central pawn d5 for the lateral c4 pawn, he must reach some pressure against d4 in return. Here it's not the case. So after queen c2, black played bishop b7, rook d1. Look how white is gathering his pieces on central files and near to the king side. D takes e4, e4, very ambitious. White managed to realize his idea to push e2, e4 in just one step. b5, and now white continued similarly like in the previous shown variation, h4. When one side is trying to create a local PC superiority, an important role is played by bringing the rooks into the battle, and the main reason behind such a move is that white will be able to activate the rook along the h file, or by a rook lift, rook h3, rook g3 along the g file. So both files are available for white's rook. At the same time, h4 is a typical idea which supports knight g5. Sometimes a bishop is sacrificed on g5 after h takes g5, h takes g5, or a knight, in order to make possible the collaboration between the queen c2 and the rook from h1 in attacking the vulnerable pawn in front of the black king, h7. Now black should refrain from pushing the pawns in front of the king, but a move like h7, h6 is very tempting. I would have preferred knight bd7. Black has to consolidate the knight from f6, and maybe if the knight from f6 will be deflected with the e4, e5, the knight from d7 will be able to cover his duties by playing knight f8. Bishop e2, a5. Now Black is playing active, trying to deflect the knight from c3 from the defense of the central e4 pawn. If Black manages to play bishop e4, then all the problems are solved for him, since the bishop from e4 will dominate the light squares. Knight g5, b4, knight b5, h6, bishop c7, queen c8, e5, and after bishop g2, rook g1, white has enough compensation for the sacrificed pawn, and he can untie his queenside pieces, the knight from b5 and the bishop from c7, by playing bishop d6 at some point. And then he will reach the outpost from d6 with the knight b5. Anyway, this was preferable. Notice that Black was under the impression there's no danger on light squares, since the pawn from c4 firmly controls the d3 square, and the bishop from f1 is rather passive. But in fact, white has 4 chessmen in the attack: the queen from c2, the rook from h1, bishop f4, knight f3, and the pawn from h4, while Black is defending only with the knight and 2 pawns. It makes 5 against 3. This is enough for mate, since white needs only 2 pieces in order to mate. Black played h6. White continued naturally with bishop e2. And here Black went astray. He played b4. This is a frequently met psychological mistake. Black is seeking for counterplay, while he forgets about the enemy threats, or simply can foresee how the attacker will continue. It is very difficult for Black to figure it out what will happen at the next moves, and he must consider that he has plenty of pieces around the king. There's well defended on light squares, since the bishop from e2 can't participate in attack, and that after knight g5, h takes g5, h takes g5, he will always be able to close the b1 h7 diagonal with g7 g6. For this reason, Black played b4. As a result of this move, white took on b4. After bishop b4, the bishop which actively participated in defense will be deflected on the other wing. At the first sight, Black started an active operation. He's threatening to grab the e4 pawn, but the problem lies in the fact that for this small counterplay he's using his already activated pieces, because he considered that bringing the undeveloped pieces from the queen side into the battle, the knight from b8 or the rook from a8 takes too much time. But black will be simply outnumbered on the king's side in this case. e5. Now black missed the last chance, since the knight from c3 is pinned. Bishop e4 was compulsory. Maybe he was afraid of queen c1 when after knight d5, bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes. White seems to have a promising attack, but the basic idea, rook h3, rook g3, can be met by bishop f5, and after knight g5 the bishop from f5 tends to be overburdened, because it has to defend g4, h7, h3 at the same time. Rook e8. Now black is threatening to get back with the bishop and chase the white queen, but after knight f7, king takes f7, bishop h5, king g8, with rook h3, bishop takes h3, white can deliver a perpetual check. Probably black was scared about this reinforcement on c1 h6 diagonal with queen c1, but he forgot that his main problem is defending the light squares, and with bishop e4 he would have prevented the dangers on light squares. Instead, black played automatically knight d5, considering that the typical procedure and the known way to continue such an attack, knight g5, will be met by h takes g5, and of course if bishop takes g5, then bishop e7, and after h takes g5, black plays g6. Now we can see how white used his superior ratio of the attackers in his favor. He wants to avoid the defensive move g7, g6, and for this reason he first took on h6. Now of course g takes h6 is almost compulsory, since otherwise black will remain without the pawn. He threatens to simply regroup with the bishop on d2 and then to play knight g5, continuing the threats on h7, where the knight from g5 and the queen from c2 will be collaborating in attacking h7. So g takes h6 is the only move, and now with knight g5 we see that white is aiming for h7. The queen, the knight, and the rook from h1 are all hitting from h7, and the only defensive move, g7, g6, is no longer possible. When you are defending, please avoid to rely on such last resort defensive move, because by eliminating this last chance, white will have free hand. H takes g5, h takes g5. Now the rook eventually is active and coordinated by the queen. Rook e8 anyway was the most stubborn defense, but after queen h7, king f8, g6. Now white tries to clear out the second rank in order to deliver a mate with the rook and the queen. For example, after f takes g6, queen h8 followed by rook h7 will follow, and after queen d7, white can simply continue with queen h6, king e7 and g takes f7, while the pawn from f7 is untouchable for the same reason. The rook from e8 will fall at the next move. For example, rook f8, queen g5, and after king f7, bishop h5. For this reason, the rook can't be saved. But anyway, trying to create more room for the king is the only way to escape in such situations. Black was already desperate. He played f5, g takes f6 en passant, rook takes f6. Black hoped that white will take on f6 and he can bring the knight back in defense, but white used the intermediate check, queen h7, king f8, queen h8, and we have the same mating idea. First a mate on the 7th and 8th rank with the rook and queen. So after king e7, this is the first threat, and after rook f7, rook takes f7, king takes, bishop h5, king e7, and queen g7 mate. It is true that white has knowledge about the mating patterns involving a piece on g5, a pawn on h4, and the rook still on h1. But what was to be remembered from this game is the way that white prepared the attack, how he did only effective moves, increasing the speed of the attack, and in the end he managed to outnumber the number of defenders. So the most important elements in this game were creating a superior ratio of the attackers, the speed of the attack, and not in the last place, the pawn from e5. So the pawn structure also played an important role, since it deflected the knight from f6 and assured an operational base for white's pieces. Till our next lesson.